Welcome to Fortitude at Work, a podcast all about building your mental and emotional strength. Pull up a chair and join in the chat with your hosts, Leanne and John. Let's talk all things that put fortitude to work for you.
And we're back.
We are.
Look, we match.
Oh, we do too. We've got the pink happening.
I know. Did you want to be a pink lady or something?
In another life. Absolutely.
We go together. Okay, I'll stop singing.
Season 2.
Season 2, episode 10.
Okay.
Wow, how time flies.
Time's fun when you're having flies.
We're only doing 12 episodes in this season.
Okay.
And then we're taking a break
Yep.
because I'm finishing a little thing called PhD.
Okay. That's probably good.
And then when I finish that, which is December,
Yeah.
we might kick January off next year with season 3.
It'll give us some time to go and gain some more wisdom because we're just about spent,
Oh,
aren't
I
we?
think we are.
It's like
Pass me a cigarette.
we've just spewed out all of the wisdom and we're almost empty.
We are.
Yeah.
We're almost done. But today,
Oh, we've got something.
I have
Yep.
got something. We're going to talk about gap hunting. I don't know if I've shared this book before, have I? This is my Leanne's little book of things.
Gap hunting.
So I just have like pages and pages of notes and things that I come across and write down and think about. And
That's very cool.
it's ready for me to fill up over my lifetime and then hand it on to somebody in my family.
Yeah. It'll be in the trunk.
One day when I'm gone.
It'll be in the trunk when they go through your stuff.
Yeah, it'll be, what's this?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't want this.
Yep.
Okay, so I want to talk about gap hunting. And we have talked about this before, and we've talked about it in season 1 before. But I don't know that we gave it its own episode.
What's important?
Yeah, I think we talked about it in terms of mindfulness, perhaps.
Yeah.
And the reason that we call it gap hunting, it was really Frankl's quote, so Viktor Frankl's quote, Man's Search for Meaning,
Okay.
that got us thinking about this originally.
Yeah.
So,
What do you say?
okay, so what he said was that between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom,
Okay.
which I think is beautiful.
It is.
I use that quote so often in so many keynotes.
That's true.
Right.
Yep, and it comes up a lot in
Yeah.
people's wanting to change. How do I change? If
Yeah.
there's something I'm not happy with in my life, or I feel stuck, or I'm afraid, pardon me, the key to changing that is to find that space in between your reaction to the event.
Yeah.
And spend some time in that space, find it, grow it, and change in that space, and then your reaction to the event is different.
So I guess the first thing we need to know is that we're being triggered by something.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first thing that he says, right? So we have a stimulus, a trigger, and we're going to have a response.
Yep.
So what are the sorts of things that might be triggers for people, do you think, Johnny, in your experience? Because you've talked to a lot of people.
Yeah, well, there's the top 10 mental health concerns around anger, anxiety, depression, being stuck, all of those moments in our lives where something happens in front of us and we are triggered that creates a response in us.
So do you think it's the trigger is often related to feeling judged by ourselves or others?
That's one of the triggers, yeah.
Yeah.
Your triggers, if it's around post-traumatic triggers, it can be an event that is that has reminded your body or your mind of a time in your life where you witnessed something traumatic. So you can be triggered in that response. When someone does something and you have a button or a trigger around not feeling loved or cared about or heard, that can be triggered very easily.
Yeah.
And your response to that can be anger, it can be sadness, it can be anxiety, it can be fight, flight, freeze.
Yeah. And so And it can be something simple. It doesn't have to be like
no,
a chronic major. I think it's Dr. Libby Weaver, and I'll put the link to her wonderful work in the show notes. I mean, she talks a lot about stress and stress triggers and how that works. And she's got this wonderful explanation that says we tend to go through the world thinking that people, we want to be a certain way in the world, and thinking that people need to perceive us a certain way in the world. So, for example, if I'm going to work, I'd like people to perceive me as being efficient, timely, organised. And when something happens where we fear that people will not see us
The way we want to be seen. Yeah.
then that difference equals stress.
Yeah.
So I want to be seen as, organised and prompt. I get stuck in traffic. I get to work late.
And you go, I'm going to be seen as inefficient.
And not organised, and that's stress.
Yeah, yeah. Or if you pride yourself on being compassionate and caring, and then something happens where you're unable to be there for someone, you feel guilt.
Yeah, I think that whole vicarious stress, like being stressed for somebody that you care about who's going through a painful time, and being worried about that person, they're having their experience, but you've got empathy for them.
Yeah.
So you're carrying that. So all those sorts of things are the sorts of stimulus that Frankl was talking about, wasn't it really?
And it starts with it annoying you enough, because people are quite happily can live their entire lives with stimulus that annoys them and creates a negative response. But if it's a livable level, they will just stay in that space.
Yeah, that's true.
But if it gets in the way of your relationships or your career or your sense of self-love, and you are stuck in a cycle of sadness or depression or anxiety or stress, it's in those times in our lives where we go, I might need to do something different because this isn't sustainable for me.
And that's really what Frankl's talking about, isn't he? He's saying that between what's happening to us and how we choose to respond to it, we have this gap.
Well, some people don't. It's knee-jerk originally. A lot of people just goes from the event, the trigger,
to
and the response, bang, there is no gap.
Yeah, not to 100.
Yeah, not even a millimetre gap to get in there. And people go, well, yes, I recognise that I'm having this response and it's killing me. I just can't seem to find a way out of this cycle of behaviour.
Yeah.
So that's when we go, well, let's start hunting for that gap.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So there is a gap for everyone.
Yeah, it's there.
We all have it.
It's there. It's just about finding a way to grab it, identify it, grow it.
Yep.
Yep.
And so let's talk about how you can find that gap. How can you be a gap hunter? What are some of the things that you can do? So something I've caught myself doing a bit, because we're kind of talking about mindfulness, aren't we?
Yeah.
Being aware of what's the language and the thoughts that's going on in our heads, being mindful of what we're saying to ourselves.
Yeah, witnessing the way you're thinking and what you're doing.
Sort of standing back.
Rather than being a servant to it, being a witness to it.
Yeah.
Watching yourself. And you may only get to watch yourself with hindsight, which means you can have the event and the reaction. And it's only half an hour once your levels decrease, or you can actually spend a little bit of time processing what happened there.
Yeah.
And that is one of the first tools of finding the gap, is to process the event soon after the event.
Yeah.
So you don't have to be in the gap to start with. You can just be soon after the event.
Yeah.
And instead of processing it 3 days later, process it within an hour, process it within half an hour or whatever happening. Go, what happened there? What was my trigger? What was my response? Just being aware of that opens that 1 millimetre to 2 millimetre gap.
Yes, having that moment to reflect without judgment, right? Without beating yourself up, I wish I'd said this, or I hadn't said this, or they said that. Just reflect on the moment. Yeah. And we actually know from the research that reflective practice is really powerful in so many ways. I had to do it as part of my research process.
Yep.
I had to do reflective practice. So memoing, they were calling it in grounded theory. So it's just such a powerful learning tool, isn't it?
It is. And if when I have clients, for those that are visual, I'll have a whiteboard, and I'll show the event and the reaction, and there being no gap between it. And then I'll say, and then we'll look at the timeline after the event and say, how long after that do you look at the event? Do you process it? And you say, well, if I usually sit in that state for 10 hours, or I sit in that state for 24 hours. It's okay, well then let's just start with you recognising the event and your reaction, and let's bring that from 24 hours down to 12.
Yeah, great.
And then the next event, let's bring that down to 6, let's bring that down to 4. And you can do it that slowly and that subtly along the way to bring you towards the event. And each time you do that, the gap opens more. And with mindfulness, you will start to, something that's almost miraculous and it's wonderful, is that the event happens, you get triggered, you feel the rise in the stress or the anxiety, the fear, the reaction, and you notice it when it happens. And you go, hang on, I'm spotting it as it's happening now.
Great. Yeah. That's fantastic.
And that's the gap revealing itself.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, and that happens in a 2 steps forward, 1 step back process.
So like a graduated practice.
Yeah, that's it.
It's a practice, right?
Yeah, it's like going to the gym.
Yeah.
Yep. You want to increase your fitness. You'll increase your mental fitness by processing the event and the reaction. And eventually, and it comes every time, the gap will start to widen and you'll be able to catch yourself and take those breaths and look at that thought, have the awareness around it, and start practicing a new way of thinking about what's just happened before you react.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's terrific. And when you're getting to that, thinking about a new way, do you, in that space, in the gap, do you challenge your thinking? Do you get to a point where you can challenge your thinking, where you can say to yourself, okay, this has just happened, I feel like this, but is that really true? That's
one of the ways. So firstly, you look at you can say, okay, I've found the gap, and often taking deep breaths, 2, 3 deep breaths. And you say, okay, I've noticed the situation, I'm about to react, I'm going to take a moment to take 3 breaths. I'm going to think about what happened, what I'm reacting to, and whether what I'm reacting to is true. That is one way to look at it. Is it true? Yep. And secondly, you can, with a self-awareness around family of origin and childhood trauma, if you grow your awareness around that, then you'll know that this trigger is based on something that is not happening now, something that happened a long time ago, that I'm not at risk now.
And so being able to reassure yourself that you're not at risk now, that must take a lot of practice.
Well, I call it being kind to yourself in the gap. So if you can spot the gap, take the 3 breaths and say, I'm going to be kind to myself in this moment before I react. And even if I react, and I react in the same way I have done in the past, which brings me my anxiety, my fear, my sadness, just practicing being in the gap and even failing, if you like, is okay. Because then you add forgiveness to the process.
Yeah.
And you say, okay, I just noticed that I did get into the gap. I did start to have some awareness around it. I did start to think whether this is true or not, but I still reacted. And then you go, okay, that's okay. I'm going to forgive myself because I am on an upward track. I am on a trend towards taking the power out of this gap that was causing me so much grief. And to care for yourself and be kind to yourself in that pace.
Yeah. And so he talked about being kind to yourself. It's a process, it's learning, it's...
Be patient with the pace.
Be patient, maybe having a bit of support.
Yeah.
It sounds to me like if you struggle to find the gap, and we know we all have gaps, right?
Yeah.
Before we respond. But if you find you struggle to find the gap, you've got a short wick, you've got a short temper, you take everything personally, everything hurts.
Yeah.
Is it a good idea to seek out some professional help where you can safely explore maybe the origins of those things?
Yeah, and that's about being kind to and having awareness around the trigger. So if you learn or you remember why the trigger was placed in the first place, and it's usually around safety, it's usually around something you did to keep yourself safe. So if you learn about that or remember why you put that suit of armour on and with that trigger to protect you, spending time with someone that can help you find that time and to be aware of it and to understand it and to actually even revere it. So it was It was necessary.
Yeah, it worked.
It worked.
You needed it.
Absolutely. And it's only now that you're going, I think I might take the risk of lowering that protective suit of armour.
Yeah.
I'm now going to know that I'm not at risk now like I was then.
Yeah, fantastic. So I guess then what that really is about is overall it sounds to me like it's about reducing stress and anxiety in your life.
It is.
If you have the gap. Because something happens, you've got enough awareness of yourself then to go, hang on a second, they're pushing my buttons.
Yeah. Well, you own the button first, and that is not they're pushing my buttons, is that I'm allowing my button to be pushed.
Great point.
Yeah, so I am feeling this way when that happens is the start, and that's in the way you express it. So rather than they make me feel or you make me feel,
Yeah, terrific.
or they did that to me, it's
I am reacting.
yeah, I feel this way when that happens. Yeah, and the reason I feel that way when that happens is because of the on-purpose protection that I put in place for very good reason, and it has kept me safe all my life.
Yeah.
And so the more you understand that, and the more you recognise that, and the more you say thank you to that, then you can say, oh, look, I now know this, the gap grows larger. You are kind and loving to your protection processes, and then you're kind and loving and patient with your pace to remove those protection processes, so that you can have a more peaceful life. Carl Jung about that helped. It was good for me in the morning, and now in the afternoon,
may not serve me.
May not serve me well. So you say thank you for the protection. I've got this.
Yeah. And so from that then, as Frankl says, the reaction that we then choose, having that gap and making that choice, gives us growth and freedom.
It does. It does.
Freedom is a big one, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
To go,
yeah. Well, the opposite of that is to be imprisoned.
Yeah.
And to be, you're stuck in a cell.
Yeah.
It's lonely.
Yeah.
That's scary. And we only get a certain time on Earth.
Yeah. You don't want to be exhausted all the time.
Yeah.
Right?
So whatever's left, it'd be really cool to have a more free, self-caring, self-loving, more peaceful experience.
And that's if you can find the gap.
That's it. And if you can't find it on your own, there are so many people out there who will help you. Absolutely. And often they're wounded healers.
Yeah.
People that have gone through that.
Yeah, they know.
And they know and they want to share that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it'll be a nice thing to do, to go to a wounded healer for them to help you find your gap.
Yeah. That's beautiful, Johnny.
Yeah, I'm full of it today.
You are. Good stuff.
Yes, thank you.
Good stuff. Bye all.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for your time today. Hope you got some great takeaways from our chats. If you'd like to know more about John and his counselling, go to johndiamond.com.au. If you'd like to know a bit more about Leanne and the work she does in the mental health of small business owners, go to fortitudeatwork.com.au. Don't forget, check the show notes for any additional information about support and resources specifically for small business owners.